Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. This is the Institute for the Study of Business Markets, and my name is Lynn Yanyo. I'm the Executive Director of ISBM, and I appreciate you spending your noon hour with us if you're on the East Coast, or your morning with us if you're later in the time zones. Who are we? We are ISBM. We were founded in 1982 as a collection of academics from institutions from around the world and B2B companies that are both interested in improving and advancing the knowledge base of B2B marketing. And today we are a collection of about 40 member firms that are sharing our needs with about 30 academic fellows and B2B instructors. And so we're very glad that you're able to join us today from wherever you are. Today we have Bob Cooper talking to us, and Bob is famous for his Stage-Gate work, and I think you're going to find his presentation just amazingly useful, because even though we might think that we're in this crisis mode, we have to stay in our strategic thinking. And so Bob's going to talk to us about that, and I'm sure he's got some great answers to questions if you want to ask about what do I do today at the end. Here's how you'll interact with us. So if you hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toolbar at the bottom. You'll be muted, and we're not looking at your video, and we won't, so don't worry about that. But there's a little box that says Q&A. If you click on that tab, you'll get a screen where you can type in your questions. Please type your questions at any time. Right now, whenever you have the moment, as you think of it, please type in your questions. I'll be monitoring those questions, and then I will field them to Bob as they come in, and if it's appropriate, or I'll save them to the end if we missed it by a little bit. Okay, so please type in your questions there. Let me tell you a little bit more about this. Everyone always asks, can I get this again because I missed something or I want to share it with someone? So absolutely. After the webinar, you'll get a link to this, but you can also find all of our previous webinars on our library. So if you go to isbm.com, and then choose the library, you'll see the most recent webinars there. And if you're a member of ISBM, well, I greatly thank you for being a member, and you can access all past webinars and all past presentations and our collection of curated content in B2B Pulse. And B2B Pulse requires that you have a username and password. If you have forgotten that for some reason, then you can ask us to help you get back in, or you can ask us to help you register if you're a member and you don't have a registration. So please just email one of us or go to isbm.com and go to contact, and you can talk directly with us and we can set you up. Here's our leadership team. So I'm Lynn Yanyo. You may have met Rand Mendez. He's been talking to all of our members every day and trying to give us some help. Becky Williams manages our curriculum. And then on the academic side, we have Stefan, who is directing our research, Lori, who does everything behind the scenes, and then Ralph and Gary, who are our emeritus directors, who are still with us, thankfully. Our fellows include Bob Cooper, look at him right there at the top, and an amazing collection of academic researchers who have just are thought leaders and driving the knowledge base for us, from Abby and Jerry and Sandy Japp. And then we also have all of these member firms which feed their needs into the system so that we can understand better what we need to be working on and understanding better, and then sharing it back with you. We have a lot of upcoming events, which we have changed everything that we were planning for this year to be digital and delivered virtually online. So today we have today's webinar, but there are several more webinars coming. If you're not seeing our mailing list, we have 2 emailings that are going out every week. One is the happenings email that just tells you the things that are coming up that you might not want to miss. That comes out like every Thursday. But we've added an email every Tuesday, and we've also added some town hall discussions called Marketing in Uncertain Times. These are pretty densely packed, useful things. And if you're not seeing those, go to isbm.com and contact us and make sure that we're connecting you with email, that 1, you're in our database so we can send you an email, and 2, that somehow your emails aren't going into a spam filter or something else at your company. Additionally, we have a bunch of courses that are coming up. Our next course, now again, all online, is Pricing in a Crisis. And Joanne Smith is amazing, and she's got this specifically proactive approach to making sure that you're not reactively pricing in this crisis, but that you're doing what you should be doing and making sure that you maintain your prices where you can and extracting your value. It's going to be delivered over 2 separate days, on April 14 in the morning and then April 17, and that is one course, but it's separated so that it's just not 8 hours of sitting in front of your laptop. And so it'll be from 8 a.m. to noon on the 14th and then 8 to noon on the 17th. And you can go to isbm.com and sign up there. Well, in addition to that, we have a whole bunch of other courses, including Winning at New Products, that Bob will be delivering back in June. He'll mention that later. So that's our last slide. I'm going to turn this over to Bob, you should all take your advantage of being able now to asking questions and seeing what he can tell you to do in this current time frame. But also just remember, there's no need to blow away your strategy, right? So let me give this to Bob. I'll turn it over to you, Bob, and I'm going to go on mute and watch for questions.
Right, and I'm assuming my title page is up there now.
You are, and you are good to go.
Good. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and I'm glad you've joined this webinar. In it, I hope to cover many of the same topics that we're going to do in our June seminar that's going to be an online seminar now, but that's a 2-day event. This is a 1-hour event, so obviously I'm going to have to barely hit the mountaintops. So if you do need more information, please get hold of us or please come to that event. Just wondering why my page is not, oh, here we go. Got nervous there. One of the things that we've seen over the years is that things are not getting all that much better in terms of product development for companies. This is a real concern. This is a study done a few years ago that looks at the percentage of projects that meet their profit objectives. Top businesses, they get about a 77% hit rate. That means profit objectives as laid out in the business case upon which the project was approved in the first place. But the average business is getting about just better than 50-50, that about 56% of our projects hit their profit targets. Another very common metric that we see, percentage of sales or percentage of revenue coming from new products, that's around 27, 28%. Top performers score a little bit higher than that. That's a bit of a misleading metric because it's so dependent on what industry you're in and what you count as a new product, of course. Here's another interesting metric, percentage of projects on schedule. And again, we're getting about a 50-50 hit rate here. And we give people a few months leeway. But you know, most companies, most project leaders, when they present their business case, there is a timeline in it, a suggested launch date. So did you hit the launch date, give or take a few months? About 50% of projects do, which means 50% are late. These are not very, very good performance metrics. Now, the encouraging thing, however, is look at the dark blue bars. Look at how well the top 20% of firms do. These top 20% was taken from a sample of about 500 companies we work with through the APQC. And these companies basically were elected by a judging panel of about 18 people who picked the best firms based on a number of performance metrics. And so what you're seeing is the top performers are really, really doing a much, much better job than the average person. And I'm not sure whether you're one of the top performers or whether you're closer to the average or whether you don't know. And that's even worse, of course. When we look at the top performers, some of the things we notice that they do differently from the rest of the group. Number one, they really strive to emphasize unique, superior products, and the keywords are underlined here. Having a differentiated product that delivers unique benefits and a compelling value proposition for the customer. That seems to be the number one factor that differentiates the top companies. The great majority of companies in the United States, and in fact Europe as well, are doing far too many little projects. I hear the complaint from company after company that our pipeline is full, our portfolio is full, but when we look at it, there's a lot of small, insignificant projects, tweaks, modifications, improvements, and gone, or noticeably absent, are the breakthrough new products that really deliver benefits and a compelling value proposition. Another kind of project that does not typically do very well is the technical project, the technically driven project where the technical person is building a monument to themselves rather than building in the voice of customer all the way through. So one of the keys that we emphasize is coming up with products with real product advantage, finding major needs and major customer problems, and then developing unparalleled solutions, big solutions that are simply not equaled. That is key, but that is not easy to do, and that's one of the things we get into in a big way in the seminar where we have a little bit more time to spend on it. A second key to success, by the way, there's 10 keys to success here. Sorry, 7 keys to success. I'm only going to go through a couple of them today to give you a flavor. Doing the upfront homework and front-end loading the project is key to success. Again and again and again, we find that project teams and companies that do the upfront homework, that get the facts, that use fact-based decision-making, it really pays off. Or as the venture capitalist says, due diligence pays off in this game. The steps that precede development, the actual physical development of the product, which is partway through the process, the steps that precede that, the so-called upfront stages or the front end, such as screening or project screening, market and customer analysis, voice of customer, technical feasibility analysis, building a business case. The front end of the project, the first third of the project, if you will, determines success at the other end of the field. The game is won or lost in the first 5 plays, so to speak. And yet most companies do a very, very poor job on the front end. They skip through these upfront stages, jump right into development, rush down the field to the goalposts, and wonder why they don't score a touchdown at the other end. Failures. Whenever we study new product failures, they're usually the result of weak front-end activities. Project teams basing a lot of assumptions, basing their business cases on a lot of assumptions, which are sort of masquerading as facts or presented as though they're facts. The homework doesn't get done. Too many companies and too many project teams spend precious little time and effort, partly because they're in a hurry, partly because they don't have time, partly because they're spread a little thin. I mean, they're all bad reasons, but the point is the homework doesn't get done and the project gets into trouble. We talk quite a bit on the seminar about what homework is appropriate and how much is enough, because obviously we don't want to overdo this phase, because then you get into another illness called paralysis by analysis, and that you don't want either. I'm hopping over a few success factors here and getting to one of the critical ones, and that's focus. Most companies have too many projects and too few resources to do them. I suspect that the folks online today have that problem as well. It's a fairly typical one. Portfolio management is the answer, obviously. Portfolio management is about making go-kill decisions and about making the right investment decisions. And in some cases about learning when to say no, when to walk away from the table. Most companies have a failure to focus. They try to take on too many projects. And of course, once projects get into the pipeline, nothing takes them out. They just carry all the way through. The idea of a stage gate process is it's a funnel, not a tunnel. The idea is to begin with many solid concepts, good ideas, good concepts at the beginning, but through a series of screens and gates, as we call them, we successively remove the poor projects. All projects start out looking pretty good, all concepts, but partway through, when you get more facts, a lot of them start to fall by, a lot of them suddenly don't look quite as good as they did at the beginning and should be killed. And it's this notion of killing projects along the way so that the good ones rise to the top, culling out the herd, as it were. So the goal is to do fewer projects, but better projects. Do fewer projects, concentrate or focus your resources on the good ones, get them done in a timely fashion. And what basically this forces us to do is to get into an effective portfolio management system. Remember, portfolio management is about making go, kill, and investment decisions in new product projects. So we're striving for a funnel, something like this diagram. Remember, not all projects are winners. Be tough and selective. I was speaking to a company the other day doing a little online consultative session with them, and I basically said, what about your gates in the new product process? Well, I said, do you make go-kill decisions at your gates? They said, well, not really. There's sort of an update on the project for management. Well, that's not a gate meeting. A gate meeting is not a milestone review. A gate meeting is a go-kill decision point where you get rid of the dogs, get rid of the lower value projects, and focus your resources on the higher value projects. And if you're not running gates that way, you're not doing a proper new product process. Stage-Gate is one of the answers that a number of companies have implemented, and in fact, most of the top performers in the first chart I showed are using some kind of gating process to drive their new product projects to market. Just to give you a bit of a flavor of some of the key principles that Stage-Gate is based on. One is obviously focus. The system is built around gates. Gates are designed to focus resources on the good projects and dump the bad ones, learning to drown some puppies, so to speak. Voice of customer at every stage is built into the Stage-Gate process. That's a prerequisite to successful new product development. And sharp, early fact-based product and project definition. Knowing what it is we're trying to build and where it is we're trying to go, basically we get there faster if we know this. Products with a compelling value proposition, I mentioned once before, Stage-Gate has that built in all the way through. And if your new product process does not automatically lead to these kind of projects, then something's wrong with your process. One thing we haven't talked about this morning, and we do on the seminar, is effective cross-functional teams with power and empowerment. The team is critical here. It's almost like a small business with a project team leader and her team of people, somewhat dedicated, if not 100% dedicated to the project in an ideal situation. Solid upfront homework, that's another key facet of a good Stage-Gate process. Quality of execution end to end. The gates are basically the quality control checkpoints in a good new product process where we ask two fundamental questions at every gate. Number one, are we doing the project right? Are we doing a good job? Because obviously if we're not, time to throw up a red flag and maybe go back and do some of the work over. So are we doing the project right is a gate question. The second key gate question, you know it, are we doing the right project? And that's the go kill decision. Should we continue with this project or shall we dump it and put our resources into something that's better? Adequate resources, people and time. We spend a lot of time discussing the commitment of resources to projects because one of the fundamental causes of a lot of the ailments in product development is simply a lack of resources. Project team members are spread too thinly over too many projects or too many other activities. And as a result, the work on the project doesn't get done, and it doesn't get done in a quality fashion or in a timely fashion. That is one of the root causes of many, many issues in product development. The right climate and culture is obviously critical, and finally, top management commitment and support. We go through most of these key principles that underline an effective Stage-Gate process that leads to high new product performance in the webinar, in the seminar, and I hope you'll join us for that. A good Stage-Gate process, well, it looks something like the bottom diagram here. In the old days, before there was a gating process around at all, when I first started working with companies, we had something called new product development into which ideas went. And if you got lucky, after some months, often some years, a successful product came out on the right-hand side. When we began to study very, very successful project leaders and their teams, we began to see that these crafty people, these clever people did a very interesting thing, intuitively or otherwise, without any process. They just had it in their DNA. They broke the process up into a series of stages. The first stage was basically a small stage. Small number of people, small dollars, do a little bit of work, get some information, make a decision to move into the second stage, where you got more money, a larger team, a higher commitment, and on into the third stage, fourth stage, etc. And as this was explained to me by some wise person at the time, when we were first putting together the concept of Stage-Gate, is it's a bit like playing 5-card stud poker. You don't bet everything when you get your first couple of cards. You bet in increments. You put $1 on the table, you put $10 on the table, then you put $100 on the table as you get more and more money. And the smart poker player, of course, knows when to bet high, when to bet low. And as the Kenny Rogers song says, know when to run and know when to walk away. In other words, when to kill the project. So it's this stage-wise approach of incremental commitments, almost like buying a series of options on a property that manages or mitigates risk in the new product process. And that's the beauty of Stage-Gate. You don't bet the farm on the first stage. You bet a small amount of money and then move to the second stage and so on. That's the whole notion behind this risk mitigation. The gates are a very key part of the Stage-Gate process. Each stage is preceded by a gate, and I'm showing them across the top here. This is a fairly standard new product process. It consists, in addition to the ideation phase on the far left, It consists of 5 stages: a concept stage, build business case. These are the front-end homework stages we talked about. And then there's the development phase, the validation phase, and finally the launch phase. Oh, excuse me, by the way, the last gate is not really a gate, it's the post-launch review, done typically 6 months and maybe 2 years, 2 of them, done after the product is on the market, to see if we achieved what we said we would and how we can do the next project better. So these are the gates. Each stage is preceded by a gate. The gates are not milestones. There can be all kinds of milestones within the various stages. Gates, by the way, a milestone, that's where you sit down and have a meeting to decide whether you're on time and on budget, and if so, continue. That is not what a gate is. A gate is a decision point. It's a go-kill decision point and a decision to commit the resources for the next phase of the project. Gates are where projects get the resources they need, so the project leader, she and her team, can move the project forward to the next phase. The gatekeepers, the men and women who are at the gate meeting, typically senior management, they provide the resources. They commit the resources to the project leader so she can move forward. The gates are also, as I mentioned, the quality control checkpoints in the process where the gatekeepers ask the tough questions. Are we doing this project right? And are we doing the right project? They are the go, kill, and investment decision points in the process. They are not about project approval. Project approval without resources is a formula for failure. Project approval with a resource commitment is critical to making the gates work. Now, the gates are set up something like this. Every gate has a suggested list of deliverables, and these deliverables provide the key information to the gate needed to make the right decision. For example, at gate 3, approve business case, go to development. The typical deliverable is a business case, a plan of action for the next phase, a definition of the product, a listing of the project team members and the resources required, what percentage of their time they have to be on the project. So there's a prescribed list of deliverables to every gate. Keep it short, folks. Some people have gone overboard with these deliverables. And then we have the gatekeepers. These are the men and women, usually from senior management, who own the resources, who sit and review the project that is presented by the project team and decide whether the project's worthy of further investment, and if so, they commit the resources to the project right at the gate meeting, not 3 weeks later, right at the gate meeting. Now, gatekeepers need decision criteria, and once we start talking about decision criteria, now we're into making go-kill decisions. Many companies obviously use financial criteria, but you know, the numbers are usually not very accurate, especially in the first few gates. So you need other criteria that are perhaps better than simply net present value or return on investment or payback period. So we talk quite a bit about how to make good go-kill decisions in the absence of solid information, especially solid financial information. We talk about that in the seminar. The output of a gate is a decision, and there's only 4 possible decisions here: go, kill, hold, recycle. Go is pretty self-evident. The gatekeepers put the thumbs up. They give the project leader the approval to move forward, and also put in place the necessary resources, approve the people, their time, number of person days, etc., to move the project forward. Kill, that should be evident as well. It's not killing the project leader, it's killing the project. They may have done a good job only to show that this is not the best project. And so we're saying this is not a worthy investment. Let's kill this project. Hold basically is a matter of timing. Very often there's too many projects in the pipeline, not enough resources available. Adding one more project and spreading people even thinner is not a good strategy. Maybe it's just ahead of its time. So we put it on the back burner for now, and periodically that project is pulled off and put back to another gate meeting. Recycle, that's similar to rework on a production line. That's usually a rarely made call, simply because it's a bit of a slap on the wrist to the project team and leader that says you haven't done a very good job here. Why don't you go back and get some things right? If the decision is go, the action plan that the project leader has presented is approved, and the resources are committed to the project leader and her team. The decision is based obviously on a readiness check. Are the deliverables in place and are they in good shape? The business rationale is reviewed. Many companies use financial criteria, as I said, spreadsheets, return on investment calculations, but a number of companies are using some more clever approaches that actually are proven to make better decisions, especially in the first three gates, gates 1, 2, and 3, before you have solid information. And then the last part of the decision basically says, is the action plan that the project leader presented, is it a solid, a sound plan? And do we have the resources available for the team, and will we commit these resources? So there's really three keys to making the decision here. And so in some respects, a gate meeting is really a three-part meeting. Now, I'm not sure if that's the way you do organize your meeting, but that last 15 minutes of, they say 1 hour, should be spent on discussing the action plan and committing the resources. Now, how do we improve the new product process? Most of the seminar, frankly, is on what people have done to make the new product process better than the process circa a few years ago. One of the things we find is that a number of companies have made their new product process far too bulky, far too cumbersome, far too bureaucratic. They build in too much. They have long lists of required tasks and activities per stage, lengthy deliverables lists that have to be filled out in detail by the project leader and the team. It's almost as bad as, it's worse in some cases than filling out your income tax forms every year. Why did this happen? Well, very often it happens because you got too many people in charge of the process, and each wants to have a kick at the can. You know, you got the finance people want to put in 6 more tables for finance, and then you got the legal department wants to fill out a whole bunch of forms for legal, and then the environmental and safety group, etc. Each committee member who's designing or in charge of the process has an agenda of things they think should be built into it, and so that business case that used to be a 4-page document is now suddenly 24 pages. 20 pages not really needed, they're just a bunch of bump. Get rid of them. Most stage gate processes over time become far too bulky, have far too much built in. Is it really needed? Every time we have been through an exercise of leaning down the process, getting rid of the stuff that really doesn't add value, getting rid of the stuff that only should be there by exception, we usually end up cutting the process in half and making it a lot easier and more agile for the project leader and the team. If it doesn't add value, why are you doing it? Here's an example from a company in Europe that I was working with. They had decided to put Agile into their stage gate process, and they had made that decision a long time ago, way back in 2010. This is a very, this company tends to be ahead of the wave most of the time. Before manufacturers were even talking about Agile, these guys were talking about it. Basically, before they got into putting Agile into their stage gate process, they decided to lean it down, to bring it up to date, because there were complaints in the company that the process was too cumbersome. So they applied some of the traditional lean approaches that we've learned from lean manufacturing, doing value stream analysis, and went through the process and basically started in 2010, and you can see what's happened to time to market. They basically had a huge improvement, going from about 3.5 to 4 years time to market from their go to development gate. They call it gate M0, which is a preliminary business case. 3.5 years, 4 years, down to 1.5 to 2 years, approximately a 50% reduction in time to market, simply by getting rid of the stuff in the process that was slowing it down, the unnecessary bureaucracy. Then they started into their Agile stage gate, and they started doing that around 2016, and they've been working on that for 3 or 4 years, and that has led to about another 30% reduction. But they got 50% from using lean, 30% from using Agile. Food for thought. Make your new product system, your idea to launch system efficient, no waste. Use the principles that we've borrowed from the field of manufacturing, how they did it in the plant. Focus on the value stream, which is simply the connection of all the process steps whose goal is to maximize customer value. But in product development, a value stream represents the linkage of all the value added and the non-value added activities in the process. Now, this is a value stream, just the first 1/4 of the project from one company that I was working with. And they tried to map out their new product process. They actually did this on a sheet of paper about 30 feet long on a wall with a number of project leaders walking along the wall with large post-it notes and marking pens to map out the process from idea all the way through to launch. Was about 30 feet down to the right-hand side, which I obviously can't get on the screen. Once they had mapped it out, and this took about two to 3 hours, if I recall, they then walked along, starting from the left side idea, the yellow box there, and walked towards the right, and took the rest of the day to look at each step in the process and ask several fundamental questions. Why is it here? Can we do it better? Can we do it faster? Can we improve this? And by applying these principles of lean, like the folks at Danfoss, that European company I just showed with the red slide, these guys were able to knock about 1/3 of the time out of their new product process by getting rid of the silly things and the time-wasting things and the things that were bogging them down. This is a terrific way to improve the speed to market and also improve productivity of the project team as well, meaning you can handle potentially more projects during the course of the year. Is it sexy? Not particularly. Is it new? It's certainly not new in manufacturing. It is a little bit new to a lot of people in product development, and it's certainly one thing that you should try before getting into some of the more avant-garde things. We talk about 2 different methods of doing that, and obviously I can't get into the details now, but we give you some good illustrations and methods for how to do that. Now here's a second thing people are doing, and this is long before we started getting into Agile. It's called adaptive or iterative development to get the product right. Here's the principle. So this is the second big way people are really improving their new product results. They're doing iterative development. It's a way of handling the dynamic information process when you have fluid and changing information. It gets the product right, even though everything is changing around it. Now, the traditional linear process that people were using the earlier part of this century, the traditional linear process looks like this. You do your front-end work as a project leader and team. You do the upfront homework, the market analyses, the voice of customer, the technical assessment, source of supply assessment. At some point, you sit down and write a product definition. The product specs are determined. The product definition is fixed. Then you get approval to go into development. The product is developed. It moves into the next phase, testing or field trials. And you're halfway through field trials, and all of a sudden, everything starts to go wrong. And this is what the typical linear process of 10 years ago looked like. You do the front-end homework, a couple of stages up here, product definition fixed, here's where your business case is prepared at this gate 3. You move into development, you're into testing, and you're getting within sight of the goalposts, and son of a gun, somebody moves the goalposts. Everything starts to go wrong. Smart teams, we started to see about 10 years ago, smart teams practicing spiral or iterative development, a series of loops, and each loop consists of 4 components. We build something, we test it with the customer, we test it in our lab, we get feedback, insights, information, and then we revise our thinking, make the necessary improvements. So the smart team defines what information is fixed and reliable at any point, and they define what design elements of the product are fixed versus variable. The fixed elements are those that are obviously based on solid information. The variable or fluid elements are based on more fluid information. And very early in the development process, maybe as early as 2 weeks into development, they develop a first early version of the product. It could be a virtual prototype. It could be a model, a protocept, something very crude, but enough that they can test it with the customer. They can do a demo, seeking fast customer feedback. People are even using virtual reality now to do that. They test that product, that protocept or virtual prototype, which they seek feedback from the customer, they get that information, and then they use that to create the next version, a crude model, a rapid prototype, a pretotype, or something. And they use a variety of tools such as crude models, virtual prototypes, rapid prototypes, simulations, animations, a whole variety of new tools. In other words, they don't go 3/4 of the way through development before showing something to the customer. They're showing something to the customer within the first 3 weeks of development. Speaking of protocepts and prototypes, this is a 3D printed turboprop engine. I'm not sure I'd want to fly on the plane that had this. It was a prototype. This is a 3D printed food product. I just show you that you can just about build anything from a computer these days. The whole idea here is to do what Steve Jobs said. People don't know what they're looking for until they see it. That was Steve Jobs' famous quotation. He was never a fan of traditional market research. People don't know what they're looking for until they see it. So for goodness sake, get something in front of people early, often, fast, and cheaply. There was a study done in Europe of German-speaking companies that found that the average company in a major project showed the product to the customer during the development phase alone. This is not the field trials, during development. The one phase, the middle phase of the process, an average of 4.5 times before they moved into field trials. So the customer had seen it 4.5 times before the field trials even started. This adaptive or spiral development, build something, test it, get feedback, revise, basically gets the product right much earlier on in the process. Here are some of the steps people build in. Well, of course, in the business case, they build in the usual kind of voice a customer user needs and wants study. We've done that for years. Well, I hope we've done it for years. But then very early on, even before development, they're out there with a full proposition concept test with virtual prototypes or prototypes or models, and maybe even brochures, collateral, storyboards to gauge interest, liking, preference, purchase intent, and what it is we got to change in order to make the customer happier. Even before development is underway, we're showing the customer the product. And then very, very quickly into development, we're doing rapid prototype and tests. I was working with one company that made industrial valves. They used to go all the way through development and develop a real valve and gave it to the customer for field trials here in stage 4 validation. New game plan. Within the first 3 or 4 weeks of development, they had made a computer model of the valve, which they shared with the customer. Then they made a wax model of the valve, which they shared with the customer. Then they made a crude fabricated version of the valve, and so on all the way through. A working model, next version. As I said, that German study revealed that in this phase alone, 4.5 iterations on average. And then, of course, finally, the true field trials, customer tests, beta tests, and home tests in the case of consumer goods companies. But many, many iterations all the way through this. Sorry, it was 5 iterations, not 4.5. What does that do to the typical new product project and new product process? It gets the product right much earlier in the game. And as a result, you avoid the situation where you're almost down to the goal line, only to find out the product's not right. If you're finding out customer feedback as late as stage 4, it's too late in the game. Another thing people are doing, this is item number 3, to get the new product process moving faster, is a lot more flexibility. Some people are even talking about context-based product development processes tailored to each project. Make your process flexible and adaptive, with no activity being mandatory, nor every deliverable required for every project. This should not be a rigid list of actions and deliverables. Trust the project team. The project team should view their stage-gate process as a guide, but not 10 commandments that they got to follow every one of them. The project team, using the stage-gate process as their guide, maps out their detailed forward plan, and the project team proposes their actions and deliverables, which they present to management, and that is where management approves, at the gate meeting, management approves the forward plan and the resources. But it's the team that puts together a forward plan or an action plan for the next phase based on the recommendations and guides of the stage-gate process, but they don't follow that process necessarily rotely and blindly and mechanically. There's other versions of stage-gate. For example, there's stage-gate Light and Express for smaller projects, and stage-gate TD for technology developments or platform developments. A technology development could be new science or a platform development, even an IT platform that you might be using for the Internet of Things if you're into that. We even have stage-gate for process developments. Technically, it's not product development, but it's very similar, where the factory or plant manager is the customer. Exxon Corporation uses different versions of stage-gate process for just about everything they do. Oil well drilling, plant expansions and CapEx projects, pipeline construction, manufacturing improvements, new products, science projects, and internal IT projects. The point being that there's many different versions of Stage-Gate. They all sort of look the same. They have stages and they have gates and they have gatekeepers and criteria, etc. But they are custom tailored to different types of projects.
Hey, Bob, before you...
taking that approach to a bit of an extreme, and we saw this first at Corning in Corning, New York, a risk-based contingency model. Information is one key to reducing risk, and the other key, obviously, is a gated incremental idea to launch system that mitigates risk, as we said earlier. So here's the way you approach your project using a risk-based contingency approach. The first thing the project team does, say at the beginning of any phase, say the beginning of development, stage 3, they sit down in a meeting and identify the key assumptions, the key unknowns, and the key uncertainties. These are the assumptions that are critical to the success of the project, critical to product design, or critical to the business case. So they identify them. What don't we know? What do we know? Then they agree on the knowledge gaps that have to be filled. What knowledge do we have to get in order to address these critical assumptions and in order to mitigate risk? Then the next step of the meeting is they say, okay, given that we have to get these 3 pieces of information, what do we have to do? What tasks do we do next in order to address those information gaps? And this list of tasks then becomes the activities or our go-forward plan. The net result is that each project is custom tailored, contingent on its unique risks and assumptions. And this is a model that Corning actually used. And as you can see in this model, this is from Corning with permission. The project team uses this fairly simple canvas. They identify key assumptions, number 1, number 2, key unknowns, number A and B, in the area, and they also look to their own experience and product concept, prototyping, etc. They ask questions in 4 boxes here, 4 areas. What market information and market assumptions and key unknowns in the marketplace regarding product design and the product technical solution, the process or the manufacturing process, and the business case. And from that, they're able to identify what are the keys. What key pieces of information do we absolutely have to get? And as a result, what are the next steps in this process? One of the things you probably realize right off the bat is this may not be the kind of process you might want to use for your most junior people. These are smart, experienced people. By the way, they developed this process when they had one of their most challenging projects that was going to make them a lot of money and had to be done very fast and had to be done very professionally. They developed this process, and the project was called Gorilla Glass, which is the project that Steve Jobs, when he was alive and heading Apple, had asked for. He wanted a special kind of glass for his iPad. And that challenge was given over to a group of people at Corning to do. And they put together this methodology, this sort of risk-based approach. And it proved to be so effective on Gorilla Glass, they've used it for a number of other major projects since. But it's not rocket science. Here's an example of a company I work with doing this. Here's the project team using a slightly different canvas than Corning's. This one's a little more sophisticated canvas. They're developing their action plan. This is an Ohio company. I won't mention their name. The project team was actually developing their action plan. They used the canvas on a whiteboard because it was simply larger than a flip chart. And you can see there's different boxes on this whiteboard, market, product, etc. Same sort of thing that Corning had, but they're using different colors. The green Post-its are the things we really know for sure. The yellow are the things we sort of know, but we're still a little bit uncertain. And the red things are the things we really don't know and are critical. And then from the red and some of the yellow come the action plan. The action plan are the orange notes over here on the right-hand side. And from that, the team is able to put together their action plan for the next month or 2 of the project. Then we get into Agile. An increasing number of companies over the last 6 or 7 years have started to borrow Agile from the software world and put it into Stage-Gate. My first encounter with this was with a company I sat down with. The company's called Chamberlain, actually. They're a B2B and B2C company. If you've ever visited Home Hardware, or Home Depot, I should say, you probably have seen the name Chamberlain. They make garage door openers. Well, not only do they make garage door openers for your house, but they also make industrial gate openers and door openers that truck drivers, et cetera, can use as they're driving into the loading dock area, et cetera. So they're a B2B company and B2C. The head of engineering sat me down at a conference we were attending together in Tampa about 6 or 7 years ago, and basically said, I got a problem, Bob. I got a whole bunch of new people on my development teams. They're all IT guys, because in the old days, a garage door opener, for example, but like you might have, was just a fairly mechanical device. It was a gearbox, electric motors, some chains, pulleys, and a fairly simple radio frequency controlled handheld. No software at all. Today, that's very different. You know, we have truck drivers using iPhones to open gates and things like that. So you need software people on the project team. But our software people are using this new method they're using in Palo Alto, or Silicon Valley, called Agile. And our mechanical and electrical engineers are still using a gating process. And they're fighting like mad. They don't seem to be, it's like oil and water here. Well, I suggested half facetiously, I said, well, Richard, why don't you put these guys in a room, the mechanical electrical engineers and the software guys in a room, and say, fight it out and come up with a model that works for both of you. And they did. And he was the first guy I saw in North America to come up with what he called the Agile-Stage-Gate process. And basically what he did is he took the Agile methodology from software and built it into the stages of Stage-Gate that he was using for hardware. How does it work? Well, the basic unit in an Agile system is a sprint. That's a very fast run. Typically, they're 2 weeks. They can range from 1 to 4 weeks, but most software companies at least are using 2-week sprints. These are time boxed. They have a very restricted time duration. Each sprint starts with a team meeting where the team sits down, the whole team in a room sits down Monday morning, 8:30, and maps out in their sprint planning meeting what they're going to get done in the next 2 weeks. Tasks day by day by day. By the way, this is a 100% dedicated team, so they're going to be there for the whole 2 weeks. What we're going to get done in the next 2 weeks, we agree on our goals and we map out the tasks and a plan of action for the next 2 weeks. In the sprint method or the Agile method, no plan is longer than 2 weeks. No plan is longer than the length of a sprint. Once the sprint starts, next 2 weeks, every day, for all 10 working days, we have a stand-up meeting at roughly 8:30 in the morning. It's typically about 20 or 30 minutes. Some people call them scrums. This is a 15 to 20 minute to organize each day, to set priorities, to discuss problems, share knowledge, and figure out how we're going to get the work done over the next little while. At the end of the 2 weeks, there's a demo to management and a demo to customers. These are to the key stakeholders in the process to seek feedback and any changes that might be needed. And finally, figuratively speaking, about 4:30 on Friday afternoon at the end of 2 weeks, the team meets for half an hour and discusses how well we did together and how we can improve the way we work. So the demo is very critical. This is where the completed work is demoed to stakeholders, and then there's the so-called retrospect where the progress is reviewed and the lessons for the next 2 weeks are identified. Well, obviously, this is a very nice system for the software world where you can do demos to customers online and get instant feedback, and where you do have a group of people working 100% sitting in a room writing software code. A little bit trickier when it comes to the hardware world, where things aren't quite as simple. This company Chamberlain that, as I say, you might be familiar with. Here's what Richard decided on. Richard Peterson is the head of engineering at the time. He uses sprints and scrums for physical and IT developments. These are combined products. These are smart products or digital hardware products, if you will. He's using 2-week sprints. Now he's moved it to 3 weeks because he found out very quickly you can't get much done in 2 weeks that you can demo. You got to show something physical at the end of the sprint, something that is the result of a completed task, not just a PowerPoint show, but design drawings, a prototype, a model, something that can be demoed. The daily scrums he was using about 20 minutes each. There's a scrum master. This is a person that guides the team, not a team leader, but guides the team to enable them to practice the scrum methods or the agile methods proficiently. The project teams have dedicated team members per project in Chamberlain. Now, not every manufacturing company can do that, but most manufacturers are opting for about a 65 to 70% dedication to the one project. And the project team member can only have one other thing on the go. And that's really, really key to moving things along quickly. Because of the requirement of having dedicated team members or almost dedicated team members, say focus teams, you can't use this on every project. So most people in manufacturing are saving this for the larger projects, the major revenue generator projects, the higher risk projects, and still doing about 20% of the total, and still doing the other 80% of the projects in the good old-fashioned way. Richard's now or Chamberlain is now about going on 7 years into this process, and it's working well. They've cut time to market by about 30%, the same percentage that was reported by Danfoss, interestingly enough. They get the product right now. This is a big payoff. Fewer warranty issues, far fewer returns of the product. They had some problems. At the beginning, the project team and leader lost sight of the ultimate goals because they were so focused on the next 2 weeks. And the sprints were initially too short to demo anything meaningful, so they had to extend them a little bit. Here's a typical model that we have seen that has been developed by more than one company. They keep their standard stage gate process. See, this is the ideas. These are the stages: ideation, concept. I'll just go across the page here: business case, development, validation, and launch. These loops, these golden loops here, are typically the way the folks in the Agile world draw sprints. There's a plan, they execute the plan, and then they review at the end. There's the demo and then the retrospect. And most companies in manufacturing are using 2 to 4 week sprints, many using 4 weeks. And of course, as you get into development, you're using multiple sprints. By the way, this is not meant to infer there's only one sprint in the ideation phase. There could be multiple in any one of these phases. And they're using it all the way through the process, not just for the development stage. So that's a typical model of how people are building this Agile approach into the stages of Stage-Gate. The performance results, the Europeans seem to be a little bit ahead of us in this game. This is a 2018 German study of 228 European manufacturing firms, mostly engineering type products, mostly B2B. And here's some of the results they got. 0 down here on the left-hand side, hardly any value. The scale here, the axis here is the value of Agile, and very large value. Based on 228 firms, shorter times to market, improved adherence to the time schedule, much improved team morale. Teams love this approach, by the way. Even though it's much higher pressure, they still love it because they're in control. A reduced project risk, technical feasibility, product failure issues, increased productivity of the development project, and increased flexibility to react to changes. So there's been some very, very positive results. The trouble is it's hard to do initially. It's a real change in the way of working. It requires a completely new mindset. Another reason people are adopting Agile-Stage-Gate is not just to accelerate things, but because they're into this so-called digital transformation, coming up with smart products with embedded software, a little bit like Richard was at Chamberlain. Embedded software is now 29% of manufacturers' new products, according to a European study I read recently. Volvo Construction is a typical example. In the old days, a new construction truck like this yellow beast on the side here, basically meant new transmission, new engine, new articulation, new suspension systems, a lot of mechanical, maybe electrical engineering. Today, most of product development in that same truck is software development. Software to improve the effectiveness and productivity of the driver. Software to improve, to minimize his waiting times in lines, etc. And so the issue that a number of companies, including this one here, are facing is how do you handle these projects where there's IT people and traditional engineering people working together on the same project, each using a different system, each having different cultures. One option, obviously, is split the project into two and run as two separate projects. Well, there has been at least one study I know of that looked at that, and it's not a good plan, by the way. It doesn't work very well. Another option is a hybrid model. Take the Agile method from software, combine it with the Stage-Gate model from hardware, and call it an Agile Stage-Gate process. And we do spend quite a bit of time on that at the seminar. Well, I am sort of approaching my 1 o'clock deadline here, and I just want to say that I hope you've got a bit of a view of the number of new things that are possible in a stage gate process. Our 2-day seminar, it's called Winning at New Products, based on the book. It will be held regardless of the COVID-19, and it will be delivered remotely over several days. And I think the decision has been made, Lynn, after I prepared this slide, that we are going to do it as a remote seminar, an online seminar over a couple of days.
That's right.
By the way, those people that are interested in new and improved approaches to StageGate can log on to my webpage at no cost and download a number of articles that have been published in reputable magazines and journals, including the Agile ones, the accelerated ones, etc. So now, Lynn, if we do have some 5 or 10 minutes perhaps for questions at this point, if you have any.
We do. So we had one person who early on was interested in StageGate for digital transformation projects, which you touched on at the very end. I would maybe just let you explore that a little bit further. And you described how it's not good to break it into several projects. If a group has never done that before, what's the first couple of steps they should take in trying to explore managing a digital transformation project?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and digital transformation, of course, is forcing us to do a lot of things differently, which is maybe a good thing. The approach we've heard many companies take here is obviously not to split the project in two and have the software guys sit in one room and run their project according to their plans and their methodology, and the hardware guys sit in another room doing it there, because doing it using their traditional gating approaches. And then the two teams never speak to each other except perhaps at the odd milestone meeting. And that's perhaps not a good way of doing things. As I said, I found one study done in Europe that showed that this did not lead to good results. This is not a happy outcome. So how do you handle these projects? Well, I think the first thing you have to do is not just do it, although there are some people would suggest that might be the best way, the Nike approach, just do it. I think you got to take a little bit of time to sit down and figure out how you're going to do it. We've worked with some companies who spent, I don't mean months, I'm talking days, where the knowledgeable project leaders and team members, or perhaps, and this is a good way to do it, the team that is going to pilot it, sits down and maybe gets some outside help, and Lynn, as you know, we can provide them with the outside help, and spend some time thinking about how we're going to do an agile stage gate approach. Because it's not as easy as logging on, reading the Agile manifesto, and getting some software guy in as a consultant to show you how, because it doesn't work. Manufacturing is a lot different than manufacturing product developments are a lot different than software developments. And so most manufacturers have made quite a few adaptations and adjustments to the traditional Agile stuff that you'll see online, and there's so many webinars on. For example, dealing with the issue of dedicated teams. That's a tough one because you're not going to have dedicated teams in the manufacturing segment. Well, if you're not having dedicated teams, then what are you going to have? One of the companies I work with in Europe is Tetra Pak. And Tetra Pak has actually spent quite a bit of time studying the optimal degree of dedication. Can we have people that are 50% dedicated? How about 70% dedicated? How about 90% dedicated? And I think they've concluded that about 65 to 75% dedication with the project team member working on no more than 1 or 2 other projects is about ideal. Manufactured projects obviously have time lags and waiting times, and so it's not realistic to have 100% dedication. So those kinds of issues. What about team organization? Agile preaches a completely different type of team organization. There are no project leaders, for example, in an Agile project. Well, that's like heresy to the typical manufacturer. What do you mean, no project leaders? There's a scrum master, there's a product owner, and on and on. And so you have to deal with some of these issues. My suggestion, Lynn, is if you have somebody that's serious, that they contact you, and we can perhaps set up a webinar and walk them through some of these issues. But they should have a pilot team or two teams ideally. Most people say pick 2 pilot projects, and working with the maybe 5 folks in one team and 5 folks on the other team, 10 folks in a room. We can do a session, a couple of sessions, whereby we thrash through some of these very, very difficult questions and come up with a stage gate system with Agile built in that they can use in their company for their kind of projects. And I can almost guarantee that it'll be very different than the standard one you can download, and probably quite different than the current process they're using. But it's something I think that ISBM can help with, and I certainly would encourage that anyone to contact Lynn, and then Lynn can contact me. We see where we go from there. Does that sort of answer the question?
I think that's great. Thank you. And always just point us back to helping each other. Let me put a couple more out there, and folks can stay with us as long as they're interested. But you know, one of the things that it occurs to me is if you're just getting started in this and you've been running some other method for managing and not a full stage gate, is how can I benchmark myself against my competition and know that I should be improving, or convince my management to change because I know I should be improving? I mean, is there a way that you can benchmark, you know, how many iterations I have with a customer, for example, before I go to launch? Or are there other things that you can give us some guidance on?
So the question, I'm trying to simplify it a bit here. If I'm not doing stage gate or not doing it very well, how can I benchmark?
Right.
And I guess there's two different ways of benchmarking here. One is to look at performance results. And I did share a couple of performance results, I believe, on my first slide. There was those bar charts. Mm-hmm. If you get the book Winning at New Products, which is only $20 on Amazon, it's paperback, there's a lot more performance metrics in there that you can benchmark yourself against. Now, if you don't measure your own performance, then you have a problem. It's sort of hard to benchmark anything unless you are measuring performance. It's a bit like the golfer who never keeps score in the golf game. How do you ever improve if you don't even know how you're shooting versus par? So I guess that's the first place to start. Take a hard look at your performance in terms of percentage of projects launched on time, percentage of projects that hit their profit targets, and so on. There's about 6 or 7 performance metrics, if I recall, in that book, Winning at New Products. And we show you the performance metrics for the best firms, the top 20%, and also for the average firm. And if you look at your own performance results, assuming you know them, and see major gaps between you and the best, that should be a red flag, a call to action that you might want to discuss with management. But then you have the other question of benchmarking your systems versus somebody else. Now that's a little harder to do because it probably means you've got to get on the phone or have lunch with somebody from another company to discuss how they're doing new product development versus how you're doing new product development. In other words, what does your system look like versus the very best companies? One of the problems you get into there is very often the very best companies don't want to talk to you because what's in it for them? Here they're taking a whole bunch of time to give you advice and you're not giving them anything in return. One of the things we could suggest is, since we have done so many studies of companies, how they do it, how they, you know, what goes well, what goes bad, we do have a lot of that data. It's around in different publications. Sometimes they're hard to pull all together. But if again, I'm not promoting you, Lynn, I apologize here a little bit, but I guess this is the role of an institute like yours. If you have this issue that you want to benchmark your system versus the best, give Lynn a call. And again, we can set up some kind of a webinar or WebEx type process whereby we go through how your process works versus how it should work as practiced by the very best. I do this regularly. I'm often called to give a diagnosis or an assessment of a company's stage gate process. We also happen to have a questionnaire type tool, which if you want to get a little more in-depth and a little more scientific, we can do it that way too. But for a first start, I'd say basically a conversation about different approaches you guys use in your company versus how the very best are doing it or how you're supposed to be doing it. But you can do the benchmarking study yourself, but again, it's hard to get people to help you because there's nothing in it for them. And besides, a lot of this benchmarking has been done. And so why not take advantage of the fact that it's been done? That's what academics do. And that's what people like me do and my company used to do, Stage-Gate Inc. So give us a shout if you do want to benchmark yourself against best practices. As I say, I've done that a number of times for different companies. Very often I get called in when a company's reinvented their process, and I get asked to give it an assessment and a validation just before it goes into practice.
Great.
Good question.
Great, thank you. So this has been great. I want to remind everybody who's still with us that this is recorded and it will be available on our website. Often it's one of those things that after it's over, you think, oh, I want to hear this again. But even more, I'd like to share this with a colleague who might need to hear it too. So feel free to make sure that you share this with your colleagues who also might need to have discussions. You know, no one does Stage-Gate alone. This is definitely a team sport. So Bob, this was fabulous. I can never learn enough about this. And I always learn something new, particularly about the digital transformation area, which is fascinating to me, and watching those very different kinds of people work together. So thanks for all your insights. And again, thank you everyone for attending, and y'all take care and stay healthy out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Be well.